Gordon, like many of the folks in this room, started working for Senator Nunn on staff and hasn't stopped since. He is also a member of the advisory group, our advisory committee for the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, and he is going to moderate this panel and then lead us through the remainder of the afternoon. So I'm pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Ambassador Gordon Giffen.
Thank you, Joe. It's an honor to be here. I was told in my notes that I was to introduce myself, so thank you, Joe. There are probably 3 people that I haven't harassed for political contributions in this room that wouldn't have otherwise known who I was. I want to say how engaging and entertaining and informative the first panel was. For those of you who didn't exist in the 110 Russell Senate Office Building, I want to say that I am a survivor of the back room of 110 Russell Senate Office Building, where for 4 years I had to listen to Roland and Arnold. And Arnold's bad hearing isn't due to age. He couldn't hear back then. So I used to kid him that he didn't need a telephone. We just opened the window and they could hear him in Georgia. Just a little fun, Arnold. I'm told that there's an overflow room, although since I guess I'm the first one on the program today, we don't need it. There are empty seats. But there is an overflow room if by chance we need it. It's been referred by others to the length of time that some of us have worked for Sam Nunn. People used to ask me, how long did you work for Sam Nunn? My answer is, I've worked for him all my adult life. He paid me for 5. And not very much. So, and this doesn't eat into my time. I'm about to, a gentleman up north got in touch with me about a week ago and said that he would like to intervene in this gathering and sent me a letter to read to the Honorable Sam Nunn. Dear Sam, I wish I could be with you as your friends and former staff gather to celebrate your 80th birthday and pay tribute to your extraordinary life and career. From your longtime leadership on national defense and nuclear security to your efforts to keep new ideas at the core of our democracy, you have helped make America and the world safer, more prosperous, and more stable. Especially now when the foundations of our democracy are under assault from without and within, your career is a reminder of what a noble calling public service is. You never believed that your political opponents were your enemies, and you demonstrated that our constitutional system almost always requires honorable compromise. America could use a lot more people like you now. I'll always be grateful for our work together on the Democratic Leadership Council and the chance to serve with you while I was president. I'm glad we can still count on you for clear-eyed analysis of complex situations and good recommendations for solving problems and seizing opportunities. In the end, reality will reassert itself and your way will come back into fashion. There's none other. You're a young 80. Press on. Sincerely, Bill Clinton. So as we begin the excuse me, the afternoon, I guess lawyers these days have to drink a lot of water. Sorry, couldn't help it. At least I'm not angry. I think I speak for all of us who have worked for Sam Nunn over the years, that I have to say that on behalf of myself I wouldn't be who I am or where I am today but for having worked for and learned from Sam Nunn. And it's not just because my resume says that I worked for a distinguished United States Senator, although that certainly has been helpful. Individually, I have to say that the example that he gives all of us of integrity, character, political courage, judgment, and intellectual rigor is extraordinary, and the little bit that he imbued in me has made a huge difference in my life. If you look at the dictionary under the term role model, you see his picture. I've got to tell you one anecdote, and then my time can start. After expressing my feelings for the honor I had working with and for him, I became the United States ambassador to Canada in large part because I had worked for him. And he and Colleen came to visit Patty and me while we were there. And one of the things we would do with guests is there's a beautiful river that runs through Ottawa called the Ottawa River. And they have a boat tour, a very nice boat tour that they take up the Ottawa River. So we took them out on the boat tour. And there's probably 50 or 60 people on it. It's a pretty good-sized boat. And there's a young lady with a microphone talking about all the interesting aspects on either side of the river. And you cruise right up past the U.S. ambassador's residence, which is a gorgeous 100-year-old stone mansion that sits on a bluff looking out over the river. And the young lady with the microphone's going on. She says that this is the residence of the United States ambassador, and when the ambassador's in town, the United States flag is flying, and you can see that the flag's flying, and not only is the ambassador in town, but he's on our boat. He's sitting in the back of the boat with us, and you know, you get this little bit of, and this fella in the row right in front of me turns around and he says, "Hey, are you my ambassador?" And I said, "I think so." And he said, "Well, my name's Bob Smith, and I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and I am honored to be on this boat with my ambassador." And he leans over and hands his camera to Sam Nunn, and he says, "Hey, buddy, would you take a picture?" Can I get that in one of these books? So, I guess I'm supposed to move on with the program and be serious about this. For lack of none of us on this panel have written a book about Sam Nunn, and so I tried to figure out what theme was consistent about us, and I think what we're going to try and convey for you is a little bit about the achievements of a man whose stature is nationally recognized on national security, but whose career was built on an awful lot of other achievements. And you know, Arnold was talking about the Panama Canal vote. I mean, it was one of the most acrimonious times to be in Washington because there was an overwhelming sense in the state of Georgia that we should not approve the Panama Canal Treaty. And Sam Nunn, after his usual intellectual rigor and study, concluded that it was the right thing to do, that we fundamentally couldn't continue to defend the canal and a lot of other reasons. And he came to Georgia many times during that period and made presentations on the subject, and got pretty mixed response. One time that I happened to be traveling with him, he was in Dunwoody, not exactly the bastion of, you know, pickup trucks and gun racks, and made a presentation at the Dunwoody High School to parents. And at one point, this gentleman gets up in the front of the gathering and just yells, and this is 1978 before his reelection, and yells at him and says, "If you vote to give away our canal, we'll send you home." He didn't bat an eye. He didn't think about it. And he just looked at him in very measured tones and said, "Sir, you need to understand that the threat of home is no threat to me." Which has nothing to do with our panel. So let me quickly tell you, our panel is the non-purely armed services aspects of his achievements. And I just want to run through quickly a few things. The Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area, I just read this morning that they said that 2.7 million people visited the Chattahoochee River National Recreation Area last year. That didn't exist until Sam Nunn passed legislation through the United States Senate. Obviously, Bob, people in the House helped, but you know, it was one of the things that he was possessed with getting accomplished, and it was in his 1972 platform. When he ran for re-election, by the way, he made us go back and research every single item that was in his 1972 platform, and we built 3 books that because he said, if I haven't addressed everything that I promised to address when I ran, we need to get it done. And so we went through every single one of those items, and it won't surprise you to know he had made significant progress against every single one. He created, Randy Knuckles here, he knows more about this than I do, but the Conservation Reserve Program, a program that he is very proud of that involved tree planting in erodible land areas, which did 2 things. One, it kept the land from eroding so it could be planted, and second, reduced pollution in our waterways. Who knew? He passed legislation to enforce what we call the Runaway Fathers Law. It enforced child support orders on fathers who were not paying their child support. He worked on legislation. He was asking me the other day whether I was there during this period, and since I stayed up all night, several nights working on this, I said yes. Shows what an impression I made. He passed legislation working with Henry Bellman, a Republican from Oklahoma, in the Senate. This was in 1977, that explicitly tied tax cuts to spending restraints so that you could get a tax cut, but only if the Congress, by law, restrained spending in equal measure, because it was always popular to pass tax cuts, balloon the deficit. And rather than just voting for eyewash, constitutional amendment to balance the budget, he actually got with a Republican, passed legislation in the Senate to require spending restraint tied to tax cuts. It passed the Senate. The House had already passed their bill. He got with Jack Kemp, Congressman Jack Kemp back then, to get the House of Representatives to pass an instruction of their conferees to include that legislation in the conference. It went to conference. Russell Long didn't like the idea, who was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He thought it tied his hands. We came out of the conference where it had been turned into an expression of policy, not law. Now, if you look at your political science books, that's not possible. You can't pass it in the Senate, have the House instructed to accept it, and it not be in the bill. But the point fundamentally was, working with a Republican, he was way ahead of his time, saying you don't get the candy unless you'll take a little bit of the medicine at the same time. We passed legislation that maybe only I remember, that got adopted in the House, that changed the formula by which water sewer grants were made by the federal government all over the country, which ended up doubling the amount of money the state of Georgia received for important infrastructure. In my mind, during my tenure on the staff, one of the most significant things that Sam Nunn did was he was the first Georgia senator in history to vote for civil rights legislation. In 1975, and I can tell you the sentiment in Georgia was not enormously supportive at that time for this. In 1975, Sam Nunn voted for the Voting Rights Act. No Georgia senator previously had done it, and he led the way in encouraging expansion of the Voting Rights Act nationally so that other parts of the country that were not covered by the Voting Rights Act, he actually offered an amendment to expand the coverage of the Voting Rights Act nationally, which lost by 4 votes on the floor of the Senate. It was fascinating to me that the liberals in the Senate, whose states weren't covered by the then Voting Rights Act, argued against it. Ted Kennedy argued against it, said, you know, we don't need to expand it nationally. Of course, Boston at the time was not exactly a bastion of civil rights, but Sam Nunn, to his credit, offered amendments to improve the expansion of the Voting Rights Act, offered 2 amendments, both lost by 4 votes, and yet he was historic in his perspective and voted for final passage of the Voting Rights Act, a night I'll never forget. So I haven't used my hour yet, but in order to be courteous to those of whom are sitting behind me, we have lots of other people with more intelligent perspectives than mine. The first person that I'm going to ask to reflect on her perspective on Sam Nunn's career is Ambassador Dr. Brooke Anderson. Brooke served as the Vice President of Communications at the Nuclear Threat Initiative from 2001 to 2008 and really got her baptism in fire with Sam Nunn directly during that period. Prior to that, she was a special assistant to President Clinton on national security affairs, a senior official at DOE. She has served as one of our ambassadors at the UN and a senior advisor to the Secretary of State. Clearly an important thinker on national security. I think Brooke will be able to give us some important perspective in the non-pure armed services career of Sam Nunn.
Thank you, Gordon. I started working at the Nuclear Threat Initiative at the very beginning. It was February 2001, and from day one we had great enthusiasm and huge ambition. A nonprofit dedicated to reducing the global threats from nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. International, nonpartisan, amazing leadership with Sam Nunn and Ted Turner as co-chairs and Charlie Curtis as president. At the same time we were developing big ideas to save the world, we were also working to launch the organization. And that means setting up systems, buying chairs, desks, and getting the phones installed. And that's when we became the victim of a digital typo. Whenever we made a phone call, the receiver's caller ID would flash nuclear treat. It didn't sound that delicious, and our office manager spent weeks with the phone company trying to get it fixed, and finally she succeeded. Our caller ID was changed from nuclear treat to Nuclear Threat Initiative. But there wasn't enough room on the digital display for all 3 words. So everyone we called saw the digital warning, nuclear threat. We ended up going into a lot of voicemails in those days. I mean, who would pick up the phone when a call labeled nuclear threat comes in? Sam Nunn's been answering urgent calls about nuclear threats for decades, doing the heroic, often unnoticed work of taking responsibility for ensuring that disaster doesn't happen. In this mission, he's been ahead of the pack in identifying dangers, coming up with solutions, and building support for action. I'd like to give you 3 examples. Key moment number one. In 1974, Senator Nunn was in Europe, getting briefed by generals who were reassuring him that everything was okay. A sergeant slipped him a note and said, "Meet me behind the barracks. I have information you need to hear." The soldier told him about low morale, drug and alcohol use, insufficient training, and a lack of electronic fencing. Senator Nunn instantly knew what that meant. Nuclear weapons in Europe were not secure. Senator Nunn also came back to Washington with another insight, that our conventional NATO forces couldn't defend German territory for more than a few days. This meant tactical nuclear weapons would be almost the first resort to stop a Soviet invasion of Western Europe, which would lead to rapid escalation that could end the world. Senator Nunn spent the next 2 decades working with presidents, the military, Republicans, and Democrats to strengthen security for nuclear weapons, improve our conventional military capability, to pull our fingers back from the nuclear trigger. Key moment number 2. In 1991, Sam Nunn arrived in Moscow just after the failed coup attempt against President Gorbachev. When he met one-on-one with Gorbachev, he asked, "Did you retain control of the nuclear weapons?" Gorbachev didn't answer. And that was enough of an answer for Sam Nunn, who concluded that the Soviet Union was coming apart with more than 30,000 nuclear weapons, 40,000 tons of chemical weapons, a robust arsenal of biological weapons, and thousands of scientists who knew how to make weapons but didn't know how to feed their families. Sam Nunn left Moscow understanding that the United States now had a new national security imperative, making sure that the weapons, materials, and know-how in the Soviet Union didn't get stolen or sold off to terrorists or nations eager to acquire them. He worked tirelessly with Republican Senator Richard Lugar to develop the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, and he persuaded an initially reluctant Congress to pass it. It wasn't easy. Many in Congress initially couldn't see why the United States should help a government and people that months before had been our sworn enemy. In partnership with Russia and the newly independent states, the Nunn-Lugar program helped the world by deactivating more than 7,500 Soviet weapons, destroying more than 750 intercontinental ballistic missiles, and approximately 150 bombers, by preventing the birth of 3 new nuclear weapon states by helping Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus give up their Soviet nuclear weapons, by converting nuclear weapons facilities to civilian purposes, employing weapons scientists in peaceful pursuits, and securing their nuclear weapons and materials to prevent thefts and accidents. The Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program was a landmark achievement and provides valuable lessons for today as we think about current nuclear threats, including from North Korea. Moment number 3. In 2007, Sam Nunn joined forces with George Shultz, Bill Perry, and Henry Kissinger to publish an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that rocked the world. These Cold Warriors argued that the security environment of the 21st century demanded a new strategy, reducing reliance on nuclear weapons. They called for working toward a world without nuclear weapons, and they outlined urgent and immediate practical steps to start moving in that direction. Sam Nunn knew that the steps and vision needed to go hand in hand, that the vision was empty without a path. He also knew that whether or not you agreed with the ultimate goal, there could be common agreement on the near-term steps that were so essential to reducing nuclear risks. Their op-ed was by no means a call for unilateral disarmament. The 4 statesmen were clear that as long as nuclear weapons existed, the United States should have the strongest arsenal in the world. But they sounded the alarm that our strategic environment had shifted and that we needed to change approaches. It was both what was said and who was saying it that got the world's attention. More than 2/3 of living former secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, and national security advisors endorsed their position. They sparked a global dialogue with leading statesmen from around the world. And in the United States, in 2008, both candidates for president, the Republican and the Democratic candidates, embraced their proposal. While the policies Senator Nunn advanced in each of these three examples were different, the North Star that drives him is constant and has never changed. Identify major threats to America, its allies, and the world. Develop effective strategies to counter them. Work with Republicans and Democrats and global leaders to turn strategies into action. Sam Nunn is the architect and driver of sweeping changes that transform the direction of the nation and the world. He has and continues to help presidents, Congress, and the world leaders see nuclear and other dangers and act to counter them. One of the complicated things about work in the nuclear arena is that when you're successful, it means something didn't happen. Senator Nunn would never say this, but I will. The fact that there hasn't been a nuclear weapon used during the Cold War and its aftermath is due in no small measure to his creative and effective nuclear threat reduction work. As I was coming here today, we got in a taxi, and the taxi driver said to us, "You know, Sam Nunn lives in that building right next door to where I picked you up. He's a great man." He said, "I have a letter he sent me in 1985. He helped my family get out of Lebanon." So on behalf of him and everyone here, happy birthday, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Brooke. One more story. I meant to tell it earlier when I read the letter. I was sitting in my office. I think it was, we could get the date literally, but I think it was the fall of 1995. I, along with many others, had been trying to convince Sam Nunn not to retire from the U.S. Senate. And he had decided that he was going to retire, and this was a Monday. And we had scheduled a press conference for the Tuesday where he was going to announce that he was retiring from the U.S. Senate. So I'm sitting in my office, and in runs my secretary, and she says, "Gordon, the president's on the phone." And as Patty will tell you, every now and then I have a tendency to be sarcastic. I said, "President of what?" And she says, "President of the United States." I pick up the phone. It's President Clinton. Said, "Gordon, I'm told that Sam's going to announce his retirement from the Senate tomorrow." And I said, "Well, you're told correctly." He said, "Well, he can't do that. You need to convince him not to do that." I said, "I've tried. On the list of things that I've tried to convince him of unsuccessfully, this is near the top." And he said, "Well, when Sam Nunn retires from the Senate, he needs to be heard. His career has been too consequential for this country to have him not be heard." And I said, "Well, why wouldn't he be heard?" Well, you know. He said, "Well, the O.J. jury is coming back tomorrow." I said, "How the hell do you know that the O.J. jury is coming back tomorrow? I've been watching CNN and they haven't told me." He said, "Gordon, I'm President of the United States. I know stuff." He said, "You have got to get him to cancel that press conference tomorrow and give me a week to try and talk him out of it." Okay. Senator Nunn's over in the Russell building in Atlanta. I get Senator Nunn on the phone. I said, "Senator, when you renounce your retirement from the Senate, you deserve to be heard. I was profound. You've had an enormous career that's impacted our country in meaningful ways, and if you announce your retirement tomorrow, no one will hear it. And he says, why won't they hear it? The OJ jury's coming back tomorrow. How the hell do you know that? And I hadn't asked for permission to reflect my earlier phone call, so I didn't feel like I could just volunteer who had told me that, and I said, trust me, I know that. So we need to postpone the press conference. Usually, he would then go through 5 different sets of questions about why, all of the, and for the first time in dealing with him on something like that, he said, okay, how long? And I said, how about a week? And he said, fine, arrange for a postponement of the press conference until next Tuesday. Well, that literally occurred. Now, unfortunately, the president wasn't able to talk him out of it during the course of the following week, but at least evidences, again, despite the fact that you weren't always supporting what he was trying to do, he didn't want to have you retire from public life. Charlie Curtis, another remarkably serious thinker and a very, very accomplished public servant. When I was working in Washington, he was one of the most respected senior staff people in the House of Representatives. He was the very first chair of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. He was undersecretary, deputy secretary, and acting secretary of the Department of Energy. And for this purpose, most importantly, the founding president of the Nuclear Threat Initiative. From that perspective, Charlie can give us an extraordinarily interesting insight to Senator Nunn's career.
Thank you, Gordon. First, let me say what you heard from Brooke is a summary of what can be considered visionary leadership. It was Sam Nunn has always applied that to his public service. And I wanted to use that as a segue to talk about NTI, because in joining with Ted Turner, who has a well-established, sometimes notorious relationship for visionary leadership, it was an extraordinary partnership as they came together for the founding of NTI. Ted, as many know, gave to the United Nations an enormous gift that really allowed it to survive into the 21st century, $1 billion. At the time, it was 1/3 of his net worth, 1/3. When NTI was formed, Ted decided to make an extraordinary gift to a private organization to engage in a field of national security where all of the policy was assigned to governments and jealously guarded, sometimes under rules of secrecy, and where the resources to do anything about the problem required government resources and intervention. It was a bet that we could make a difference. And indeed, that was our challenge. Could a private organization, even a well-funded private organization, make a difference in this field of endeavor? We considered not only the nuclear danger, but the danger from chemical and biological weapons, and we were dedicated to bringing effectiveness to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty's pledge to work toward a world free of nuclear weapons. That was our assignment, and we think we have made a difference in the now 17 years of our existence. We started out for 5 years. And Ted said, I don't want to contribute to a long-standing organization. I want to contribute to an organization that's going to spend the money and make a difference now. And we tried to do that by leveraging governmental action, providing example through direct actions, and have those examples taken up by government. Let me give you a few examples. We started out by removing 2.5 bombs worth of highly enriched uranium from Vincha in Belgrade. And we did that through a model organization working with the International Atomic Energy Agency and Russia and the United States. That model was leveraged by government in the United States with the following $3.5 billion in retrieving highly enriched uranium that was in insecure sources around the world that the U.S. had supplied as a part of Atoms for Peace. There was a comparable effort on the Russian side. Again, government policies leveraged with the means that Ted had placed in our hands. After that, we were again able to remove 2 dozen worth of bombs worth of highly enriched uranium from Kazakhstan. We set up an international fuel bank that was leveraged to engage over $100 million from the European Union, United States, Norway, and the United Arab Emirates. That is real concrete action for the establishment of the International Fuel Bank, which provided a fail-safe source of fuel for countries developing nuclear power, so they would not have the argument of developing their own enrichment facilities. It's a model that is going into effect now, and it is something that the Kazakhstan government has agreed to host, and under the auspices of the International Atomic Energy Agency. The International Atomic Energy Agency has been in the news of late, as we all know, is because they are the supervisor of the Iran agreement. And that is an organization that we were able to strengthen in the early years of NTI, and it continues to be a present mission of NTI. Again, with Ted's support, 1 month after 9/11, I was in Vienna and offering a contribution from NTI that would double the IAEA's program to help nations conduct their own security of highly enriched uranium and plutonium, something that we refer to as nuclear materials, but doesn't quite carry the message of these are two very distinct materials that you need to create a nuclear weapon. If you can secure those at their source or dry up that source, there won't be any nuclear weapons. They're essential ingredients. So we have had, I think, a very successful period that surprised even us, surprised me, I'll say, from the start of NTI. But we're still trying to answer that question today, 17 years out. How can a private organization make a difference in this multipolar world and the chaos that we see today? That is something that has concentrated our focus again on the U.S.-Russian relationship, because however tense, however disruptive that relationship is, we have existential common interest with the Russians and a duty to manage our nuclear weapons and manage our nuclear materials. Our two states have over 90% of the nuclear weapons in the world and over 90% of the highly enriched uranium and plutonium. Unless we do that job, the risk that Sam Nunn spent his career on and that Ted Turner is invested in so generously will not be eliminated. It, in fact, can visit us in a blinding minute today or tomorrow. It is something that keeps you up at night. Today we are looking at trying to prevent the focus at NTI, in addition to the Russian-U.S. relationship, is on cybersecurity that not only compromises our vital infrastructure, but risks the compromise of the command and control of our nuclear weapons. And with that risk falls the strategic stability of both states. That is a danger that we are just now, as a nation, beginning to comprehend. And it is a danger for which we have no effective deterrent and no effective strategy to address. We are also looking at the risk of mistake, miscalculation, or as Senator Nunn says, outright blunder in managing our strategic forces. They are losing proficiency over the years. It's a hard job, but it is one vital to do in a serious and professional way. We are very much dependent on the men and women in uniform for this vital job, as we are dependent on them for defending our freedoms in battlefields in Afghanistan and Iraq. So it is still a matter of challenge, it is a matter of concern, and it has changed our work at NTI in a very important way. When President Obama was in place for 8 years, he basically adopted NTI's vision and program and instituted over his 8 years 4 importantly effective nuclear security summits with world leaders to try and get attention to the danger of less than secure or even totally insecure nuclear materials distributed around the world. That was very important work. And that work, like NTI's work and like so much of Sam Nunn's career, is measured not by the empirical evidence of what happened, but what didn't happen. And that is the true legacy that he leaves behind, and in his 80 years of public service. But it is a public service, I suggest, that continues and must continue beyond these 80 years. This is Sam's life work, and I hope that it will remain his life's work because he is still the energy force and intellectual leadership, not only in the United States on this subject, but internationally, around the world. Much of our voice is now reflected in Europe and Asia. We do not have the present-day influence on the present-day administration that we have had in the past. But we are working on it, and we hope that we will find a more effective avenue of expressing that voice, that insistent conscience to address these issues that has been a central part of our mission from the beginning. Valeria McPhail, who's done such wonderful work putting this program together, has asked me to tell you something that you don't know about Sam Nunn. So one of the things I wanted to mention, Roland gave this marvelous talk about his first statewide election. And I asked him afterwards, you know, Sam Nunn, I always thought was biblically humble. Until I read Dwight Eisenhower's definition of leadership. Dwight Eisenhower said, a truly effective leader gets other people to do the things that he wants them to do, and then gives them credit for doing it. That has been Sam Nunn from the beginning. And so much of what I've done at NTI, I've looked back on and I've said, when he told me that was a really good idea, was that really my idea or was that his idea? But I think he had, that prescription has been a very important part of his success in the Congress and his success in life. Part of his humbleness, which I still believe in, by the way, was to explain how he got to the Congress to me by saying he was losing badly until Colleen shot a rattlesnake on the front porch of the house in Perry to protect her 2 kids. And that made the papers and the radio all over Georgia. And suddenly he was the top candidate. Now, Roland says, no, that wasn't the primary, that was a general election. But, you know, the general election is what counts, Roland, when you go to Congress, right? So anyway, he is full of stories of giving credit to others and full of good humor as well. The last thing you might know, you met Brooke before me. We hired 6 vice presidents at NTI when we started out. All 6 of 6 were women. And 6 of 6 were women for one important reason: merit. Those of that 6, 2 went on to work on the National Security Council, 2 were ambassadors, same 2, and 1 became the commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. This was an enormously talented, productive group of people that worked on an important mission for a great leader. So happy birthday, Sam.
Thank you, Charlie. You referred to Sam Nunn's 80 years of public service. You know, you brought into focus, I think he was a mature, thoughtful 6-month-old. So no wonder he was so far ahead of me when I got to Washington. So our next presenter is a true Renaissance man. Tommy Dortch is a remarkable talent. He's an accomplished entrepreneur, a legendary community activist in Atlanta and beyond, and a trusted, insightful political advisor. Tommy served as Senator Nunn's state director, the person who coordinated all of the field representatives and activities and outreach in the state, while those of us in Washington thought we knew all the answers. He was doing all the work. He served in that role for many years for Senator Nunn, and this is a fascinating thing, and Tommy can address it. I'm stealing a little bit of your thunder, but Tommy was the first African American to serve as a state director for any member of the United States Senate in history. So you would have thought that maybe that might have had happened before Sam Nunn, but it hadn't. A leader in his community and nationally, Tommy has received more awards than we have time for me to list, but one that I think is very impressive because of its duration is he was recently reelected to his 6th term as the chairman of 100 Black Men of America. Tommy worked with Senator Nunn on a variety of matters, and particularly was the leading thinker on the team on small business initiatives. So I think Tommy will focus a little bit for us on the small business efforts.
Well, good afternoon. Let me start by saying I want to credit Senator Nunn for my not playing golf. It will be raining, and he says not raining that bad. It will be cold, he says not that cold. It would be early, and you could barely see, he says it's not too early. And the last thing was when it was burning up, he said, well, it'll be all right, we'll cool it off out there. So a lot of the staff would go play golf with him. I went out and played racquetball so I could stay inside. But my 16 years with Senator Nunn was a great span for me in terms of having a great mentor. The things that we did during the tenure that I was on staff, I came on staff in 1978, and he had sent 2 staff people to talk to me, and I was with Governor Busby then, and I was enjoying it and flying over across the waters when Governor Busby was trying to develop our business in the state. And I get this call that Senator Nunn wants to have lunch with you. I sat down with Senator, and we had lunch, about an hour and a half. He even paid for it. And at the end of it, he said, I'd like for you to come to work for him. And the thing that got me was he said, if there are things that I support that you don't agree with, I don't expect you to come out and champion it. He said, all I ask is that you don't go out and campaign against it. I went back and said to Governor Busby, I think I'm going to work for Sam Nunn. He said that was the Associate Director State Democratic Party where it had me appointed. And he said, Sam Nunn hasn't scratched the surface. He said, I think you would be great for him, and he would be one of the greatest leaders you've been around. And I tell you, for 16 years, I never looked back because Governor Busby told the truth. What I learned from Senator Nunn was that he was a man of courage. And he made decisions based on, as he used to say a lot to the staff, what would I do if I were on the other side of the fence and someone was making a decision for me? So we ventured into a number of areas, but small business was one of those areas that when we approached him having been a businessman, his commitment was to open up opportunities. So one of the big bills that we sponsored, and Bill and the team, was the Mentor Protege program. It's the first Mentor Protege program in federal government, and it was duplicated throughout the nation and state by state, and that was an effort that was an outgrowth of a meeting we had with several defense procurement companies that were sitting here in Atlanta, and Senator Nunn had started these defense procurement conferences so that we can bring small and minority and women-owned businesses in, and all of them kept saying, we can't find the companies, we can't find the companies. And I remember that morning, Senator Nunn said, if you can't find them, then grow them. And from there, we created Mentor Protege, and from there, we flourished in the federal sector, and it spilled over to state governments because of his commitment to ensure inclusion in the federal government. In addition to that, we had the Guaranteed Surety Bond Program. It was another excuse that people kept minority-owned businesses and small businesses and women-owned businesses out, was that, okay, if you can't get a bond, you can't do the work. So with SBA, he was a ranking member of the Senate Small Business Committee, and we came up with the Guaranteed Surety Bond Program that helped us to get more businesses into the procurement arena and for them to be successful. The small business development centers that still exist in this state, we started at the University of Georgia. Georgia State has one, the former Marsh Brown College and others, and the small business development centers were centers that provided free counseling and technical support to businesses to help them prepare. Those centers still exist, one here at Georgia Tech, again, the University of Georgia, Georgia State, and we still have those programs available. We had the 5% goal for defense procurement, and we had those who opposed it, and I think, Senator, one of the things is that if we only take 5% as a goal, that's a 95% set aside for majority firms. And it really resonated to others, and it was one of the best programs, and then he came back and included historically black colleges and universities as part of that. Many people don't realize Georgia is the third state ranked for the number of historical black colleges and universities in it, and he worked closely with those, and we even included in defense that the research and all, because this was the kind of commitment that Senator Nunn made over the years for inclusion. I can tell you, I can go on and on. One of his close friends was the late Coretta Scott King, and she would call me. Senator Nunn supported the holiday bill, but also they added a component to make the Martin Luther King district an economic, have an economic component to the district, which hadn't been done in any national park throughout this country before then. And Mrs. King would call me and she said, "Well, you tell Sam that I need him." I said, "Mrs. King, why don't you talk to Senator Nunn?" And not one time did he ever reject her call. If he was not available, he called her back. And she was one of his biggest champions because he was always accessible and his respect for her. But even more than that, I remember Reverend Joseph Lowry was opposing Judge Bort's nomination. And the thing about Senator, when I brought it to him, it was never, "I don't want to meet." He said, "Okay, we will meet." And I called Reverend Lowry. We were going to Lockheed for a speech the Senator was giving. He said, "Can you have him meet me at 7:30? Reverend Lowry said, "That's pretty early." I said, well, Reverend Lowry, if you want to talk to the Senator, you need to be there at 7:30. And he came out smiling. His whole thing is, I like that Sam. He tells it like it is. He said, but I respect the fact that he gave me the time. And Julian Bond used to do that a lot. I can tell you, even as state director, after the Don't Ask, Don't Tell decision late at the White House, our great friends in the gay and lesbian community were upset, but they wanted to meet with Senator Nunn. Some staff didn't think it was good. I just went to the senator, and he didn't hesitate. He said, "Yes, set it up." So I called Rose. We get it on the calendar. They come in, and they were really angry in the lobby of the office. And Senator Nunn walked in, talked with them. He gave his opinion, listened to all of them. But the amazing thing, when they came out of that room, they said, "We may not agree totally with Senator Nunn, but we appreciate him for the fact that he gave us the audience, he discussed his position with us, and even we got some concessions on some things that he would look at differently." Well, that's the way the senator was, and that's what, and still is, and that is what made my job so much easier. Being the first African-American director, I worked my way up through his organization. He didn't put me in there because I was black. He knew that I worked hard for him, and that was the thing about Sam Nunn. If you did your job, we even tried to get Glenda Hatchett to come in. He looked at her and wanted her on the federal bench because of the work she had done in juvenile justice, and he was that kind of guy. This state still, we got more African-American federal judges in this state under his leadership. We've never had another federal judge. I don't know if we got one recently, but for all of the years, Sam Nunn's record for inclusiveness, we did 4, would have had 5 if, again, if Glenda would have two would have had 6 eventually, because one person was opposed from his community, and it was pettiness, but the senator said if they don't want to support him, I agreed with him, and Glenda would not leave. But Sam Nunn has always been one who has been open, who's been inclusive. My staff was over 55% women. We had gay and lesbian staff members. We had about 43% African-American staff members. It was based on what you bring to the table, not the color of your skin, not your gender, or not your sexual preference. When the senator appointed me as state director, he just said, "Tommy, just make sure you send me back to Washington." And we've done that. But one last piece I have to share because of his courage, and that's about real leaders. And Senator Nunn is the epitome of a real leader. There's a good friend of mine, Dr. Samuel Myers, who's deceased now. He said real leaders don't seek followers, they inspire them. And he inspires so many of us. And if you would ask any of us today, if he calls and says, "Come, let's get together," we get together, because Sam Nunn really created a real cult. He is the Sam Nunn, head of the Sam Nunn Mafia, and you never get out. And but the other thing, there were so many other things that I remember and respect, and he still is a mentor. One thing I remember when he retired from the Senate, Sam told me before I left, he said, "Now, Tommy, I know you like working community, but now you're in business, so make sure you have a balance. Don't spend as much time in the nonprofits and forget about your business. And I remember after he had left, we were sitting down for breakfast, and he said, "You want to give me that advice I gave you?" He said, "I'm doing so much volunteer work and so many different things." But that's the kind of leader he's been, the kind of leader he is, and one that inspires us. We used to do DC fly-ins and have businesses from Georgia come up, and he'd make sure the federal agencies, other members of the delegation would be there to meet with businesses from him. He's the last senator. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. He's the last U.S. senator we had in this state that represented everybody, that showed up everywhere, that came to events all throughout this state and met with people. Even when I would be with him and we walk in the lobby of a building, he would not stop until he had shaken every hand from the janitors and everybody, and if they wanted to have conversation, he had conversation. And so a lot of what I've done in my leadership role over the years have been fashioned after Senator Nunn. And I think the most impactful piece, those of us on staff know they cared about us. In 1988, they discovered I had one of the deadliest cancers ever documented, adenocarcinoma of the small intestine. It had a 92% mortality rate. I'm lucky to be in the 8% who survived. But every Wednesday, I got a call from Sam Nunn saying, "How you doing? Don't worry about rushing back to work. Just make sure you got everything you need." He called my wife, but I never forgot that. So, Senator, happy birthday for being a real leader, but more importantly, being a friend and a great mentor.
Tommy, you may be unique for another reason. Did you say he bought breakfast? Those of you who have worked over the years on his staff, how many times have you been, "Oh, I'll pay for that. Oh, gee, I left my billfold." So I think you also mentioned mafia. Didn't you say something about mafia? That's a perfect segue into our next speaker. Senator Nunn, one of the things that interested him the most during his career was his chairmanship of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations in the U.S. Senate. When I first got up there, Scoop Jackson was chairman of this subcommittee, and he decided he was going to run for president in 1975-ish. And he couldn't run for president and be chairman of that subcommittee, so he turned to a very junior, he skipped just about everybody in seniority, member of the committee, and asked Senator Nunn to be the acting chairman while he ran for president. And Senator Nunn said, "Oh, obviously, I'll be glad to do it." And all of the professional staff belonged to Scoop Jackson. So he looked at me and he said, "You got to start going to these meetings so you can keep an eye on what the staff is doing." And it was a collection of interesting people who had a lot of law enforcement, investigatory backgrounds. But the first meeting I went to was the staff was planning to dig up a field in Michigan to look for Jimmy Hoffa's body. And I'm a rookie, and I'm just sitting there, and I said, "Is there any reason to believe that Jimmy Hoffa's body is in that field?" And they had some tip. Anyway, I think you took over as acting chairman at the time it was determined that they dug up an entire field and didn't find Jimmy Hoffa. None of which directly relates to Dave Buckley. He wasn't there then, but Dave is here to help us understand more about Senator Nunn's tenure as chairman of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Dave today leads KPMG's Federal Risk and Compliance practice. He's a former Inspector General at the CIA, so don't get him contrary to you. He served as a senior law enforcement executive throughout his career. He served at DOD and at Treasury. And most relevant to this program, Dave served as the chief investigator at PSI. So Dave, we look forward to some inside information about the mafia.
Thank you very much, Gordon. I know what time it is. It's Gordon's fault. I am grateful and honored to be here today to celebrate with you, Senator, and on behalf of all of the previous staff, professional staff, and detailees of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. I guess I get to spend a little time with you all today and tell you about the leadership of Sam Nunn as its chairman. The Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation is arguably the most powerful investigative committee in the Congress, certainly in the Senate. It has extremely broad jurisdiction and is able to probe anything that really affects the morale, welfare of the citizens of the United States around the globe. It is known for its experienced and professional staff. It's known for its, thanks to Sam Nunn, its bipartisan and fair investigations. The subcommittee grew out of the Truman Committee, which probed fraud, waste, and abuse during World War II and post-World War II, the massive crimes that were committed against the United States by a lot of defense contractors delivering parts and supplies that were below standards and really ripping off the troops and putting the troops at risk. Obviously, Harry Truman went on to the White House. Somebody else should have done that. And the Senate made it a permanent investigative committee. Frankly, there was a time, not a proud time, when that power of that committee was abused. And I think that that period when Joe McCarthy chaired it taught leadership that they better be darn careful who they put in command, who's the chairman and the ranking member of this committee, because it has awesome investigative power. And as one lawyer told us, representing a witness or being a witness before the committee, particularly when the subject of investigation is like entering a star chamber, because you've got the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury all sitting right there behind that dais. Some people didn't think it was a fair environment, but Sam Nunn made sure it was fair. Senator Nunn served as the subcommittee chairman in 1979 and 1980, and then when the Democrats lost the Senate, moved to the ranking minority position, and then back as chairman in 87 and took the chair until 94, and then back as ranking member again until his retirement. During that time, his investigations spanned, we'd be here all night if I told you about half the investigations. But just so you got an appreciation of the things that the probes that he led that impacted the people of the United States. I'll name a few. Talk about organized crime. Organized crime in America, 25 years after Valachi. Senator Nunn led those hearings, listening to a wide variety of witnesses. And we learned through those hearings that organized crime was alive and well in the United States. He led landmark legislation, the Crime Control Act. Senator Nunn held hearings on the settlement of Soviet bloc defectors. He looked at the regulation of the insurance industry. As you all know, the insurance industry in the United States is regulated by the individual states. Well, he made sure we made a point to examine what happens when the regulators are weak, because the good people of the United States who bought life insurance from Guaranty Security Life actually funded the purchase of a small island in the Bahamas for its owners. Hundreds, if not thousands of people who thought they had annuities and life insurance policies had worthless pieces of paper. And how did that get past the regulator? Because in the middle of the night, junk bonds would go off the books, treasury bonds would come on the books, a snapshot of the finances were taken, and that was reported to the regulators. In fact, the owner of the insurance company stole millions and millions of dollars, left hundreds and thousands of people across the United States. It was licensed in 40 states with nothing but a piece of paper. So when those people died, many have had pre-existing conditions, they couldn't get life insurance again. Those victims were left without coverage. Senator Nunn pulled the sheets back on all of that activity, but one of the things that really got the public's attention at the time, in the insurance industry, you've got to have the insurance companies cede risk to reinsurance companies. And Senator Nunn honed in on one of the reinsurance companies because its books and records showed that its assets were guaranteed by the sovereign Cherokee Nation of Tejas, which is a bogus Indian tribe. They had assets like Marlon Brando's Death Mask and Beach Party Bingo, a movie, and some iron tailings. The Indians were really British businessmen or a con artist. Wise otter, bear who walks softly. Senator Nunn shared with us that when he was a boy, he probably watched too many Indian movies, Western movies. He had a fear that he would die by being shot by an arrow from an Indian. But when we went down there and served subpoenas and the Marshal Service had to actually climb through the windows to get in, all we found were guns. No bows and arrows, Senator. Well, we also went on to look for guaranteed student loans, landmark oversight of a federal program that was just ruptured, losing billions of taxpayers' dollars in substandard education. Senator, you remember that truck driving school, truck driving by correspondence? Yeah. It was a fascinating expose. We went down and served Senator Nunn subpoenas on that school. Truck driving and secretarial school by correspondence. We've never found anybody that actually got a truck driving job, thank God, after graduating, because most people didn't graduate. But they ended up with student loans they couldn't repay and Pell Grants that were just money dumped on the curb. Anybody could take it, and that truck driving by correspondence school owner took millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer money. And Sam Nunn exposed it all. We had a lot of fun in some very serious oversight. I'll tell you one more story. When we were doing the insurance industry, we were looking at fraud, and people think insurance fraud, they think of individual claimants. That's not at all what we were looking at. We were looking at corporate malfeasance. We were looking at basically business organized crime inside some of the nation's largest and by name most respected insurance companies. Blue Cross Blue Shield, remember them? Blue Cross Blue Shield in Washington, D.C. was actually a congressionally chartered entity as a nonprofit. I don't think they've got that congressional charter anymore. The owner, instead of taking care of the people who bought Blue Cross Blue Shield policies, kept raising the premiums. He set up an entire scheme of 100 different companies. There were 100 companies on those books, and the insurance commissioner of the District of Columbia only saw 9. And in an elaborate scheme to steal premiums by ceding risk, managing the money, and just creaming the premium. Well, he flew back and forth to London on the Concorde. None of this would have been exposed were it not for Sam Nunn. And the West Virginia Blue Cross Blue Shield plan that almost went insolvent. We had this is deadly serious stuff. We had so much malfeasance in that plan, and I'm pausing here for a minute because I'm remembering a particular witness who had a fatal disease. Blue Cross Blue Shield wouldn't cover him because it was a pre-existing condition, yet he was paying his premiums. He passed away after the hearings, but his wife told me that he was so proud to provide a statement, testimony to the committee to help Senator Nunn with his investigation. And he wanted Sam Nunn to know that it meant the world to him that somebody was finally paying attention to the plight of policyholders. So crooks are bold and brash and willing to do anything. They're willing to do anything to take what's not theirs. And Senator Nunn knew from a strategic perspective that crime left unchecked, espionage left unchecked, will just be a cancer to our country. And I won't say they're existential threats like nuclear weapons, but if crime isn't controlled and if regulators don't do an effective job in regulating, it's going to undermine the fabric of the nation. And I'll tell you, he was just as particular about PSI's investigations as he was about an armed services oversight hearing. We built those same books. We got that same illegible chicken scratch. We go to Charlie Harmon and say, "Can you read this?" He did all this without regard to political pressure. He had senators and congressmen coming up trying to get him to not look at that. And I remember one senator, he said, "You just got to be careful when somebody wants to put your name on a program. If you let them do it, you got to keep your eye on the program." I'm sure you remember that, Senator. Senate leadership trusted all these key assignments: the Armed Services Committee, the Investigation Subcommittee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, all of those key assignments to this honorable, decent man. And I just want to end by telling you that I thought and believe it was God's will that I got to come to work for you. And I really appreciate it. I'm sure all these folks appreciate the opportunity of getting to know you, working with you, and having you as a guidepost in our lives. Happy birthday.